All right, our group focused on, we'll try to, on attention spans. Oh, I'm Emily Foltz.
I'm Victoria Woods.
Michelle Payne.
Lee Cottingham.
All right, so technology has influenced attention spans quite a bit. Even while I was trying to write my portion of this paper, I had like 3 different browser windows open, and I updated my Facebook status like 4 times. So just like trying to get stuff done is harder these days. And so we decided to kind of look into this a little more. I'm going to cover, first of all, how the brain pays attention in general. And then Victoria will talk about the effects of TV and video games, especially on the younger generations. Those are the people that seem to be most affected by technology when it comes to their attention spans. Michelle's going to cover smartphones, the use in the classroom. And then finally, Lee will offer us some solutions to this problem. So the brain consists of 3 components that are in charge of selective attention. The first component is called the prefrontal cortex. This is in charge of attention span and determines what info is important and what info is not. So there's like your prefrontal cortex pretty much decides what needs to be ignored. So for example, let's say you're at dinner with friends. There's going to be a lot of noise around you, but your prefrontal cortex decides, hey, I'm just going to pay attention to my friend talking to me right now. So that's basically what that part of the brain does. The next type is the prefrontal cortex working with your senses. The senses are controlled by the temporal cortex, which you can see, that's the yellow part of the brain. I don't think it's yellow in real life, just so you know. But this part, these 2 parts working together, they pretty much involve like a visual search. For example, when you lose your keys, it's these 2 parts of the brain working together to focus on finding your keys. So you're basically what your brain's doing is you're scrambling to find your keys, you're looking over the kitchen counter, you're like, okay, that's a spatula, not my keys. That's a dish, not my keys, that's an orange. So that's your brain doing that very fast. If your temporal lobe is in better condition, you're going to find your keys faster, which I think is pretty interesting. And then finally, you have selective visual spatial attention. It uses 3 of your lobes together, the parietal cortex, the prefrontal, and the temporal lobes. This is used when you are trying to find your car in a parking lot. What you're doing is you're basically kind of visually muting everything else that exists. So let's say you have a black car. Well, you're quickly like muting everything, first of all, that's not a black car. And and then you start to kind of like just see the things you need to be seeing. So instead of analyzing every object, you're kind of muting the ones that don't mean anything to you. So that's what happens when those 3 parts of the brain work together. While many scientists are focusing on how the brain pays attention to begin with, other scientists are kind of working with this idea. Is it even bad that people lose attention? So when you lose focus, one scientist at the University of British Columbia has decided that your brain needs to lose focus. When you like switch tasks, what your brain is actually doing is it's like subconsciously processing the information that you just received. So in a sense, what you're doing is usually you lose, your mind wanders because you're thinking of your future. You're thinking of, okay, well, how is this going to affect me next? So your brain is jumping ahead of itself. That's why you lose focus. But that's kind of like a survival mechanism. So in a way, is it bad? Is it good? In a sense, it kind of just is. Take it away, Victoria.
I like this. I feel like this is the perfect the perfect segue into what I'm going to talk about, which is the television and children. And so, television and video games is my topic, but I'm really focused on what the effects are when it comes to children and adolescents. And so, one of the studies I looked at was from 2007, and they wanted to study the effects of exposure to television and attention spans with children. And 1,000 children were studied between the ages of 5 and 11 years old, and the habits of these children were to watch about 2 hours of television a day. And we saw that attention problems were significant because of this amount of television exposure. And you could see the symptoms of attention problems in the fact that they had shorter attention spans, they had worse, lost the ability to really concentrate, and were easily distracted. These children were followed up when they became between 13 and 15 years old, and the scientists saw that old habits really do die hard, because at this age they were now watching at least 3 hours of television, and some people say that these effects are caused because of overstimulation. When you watch television, you see that the scenes change frequently, which keeps your attention in the first place. Instead of a long pause of 30 seconds of the same thing, it's short clips. The children also had difficulty doing homework, and once again, shorter attention span. And so with this study, there were other people who decided to say, okay, well, since we see that there are effects from television, let's study the effects of video games. And so I saw another study that was conducted in 2010 in which middle childhood and adolescent participants were studied. And the parents reported the amount of video games that they were played every day versus the adolescent early adult participants. And attention problems were significant among children, but the older adolescents and early adults weren't really affected. And so some people say that the children's brains are still developing, and so if they are trained at a young age to watch lots of television or play video games, they will suffer attention problems faster than people who are older being exposed to the same amount. And so I found a article that I thought was interesting titled "Wired for Distraction." And it basically talks about Facebook, Twitter, all the social media outlets out there, and how adolescents are really finding it difficult to concentrate and do homework. And so at the end of this article that I read, one quote that really stuck out to me was that children are now faced with the choice of instant gratification or future investment. Are you going to do your homework now and really concentrate and leave Facebook and Twitter alone? Or is it so easy to get distracted with other things that you lose your focus?
So one of the things about having smartphones in the classroom is there's a lot of really good positives about it, but the technology is so new that it's difficult to know what the long-term ramifications of that are going to be until we're able to study that, until they've been in existence a little bit longer. So what I really decided to focus on with this is methods that we can utilize to work with technology instead of against it. We know it's in the classrooms, there's no fighting it, so what can we do to make this work with us? One of the things that there's a university in Abilene, Texas that started a project where they gave 1,000 smartphones or iPads away at the beginning of freshman year. And so they were able to see how students could utilize this. If cost wasn't an option and they just gave it away for free, how would they be able to use it in the classrooms? And so one of the things that they were really using it for is in-class research. So for example, say that we were having a discussion about smartphones in the classroom, and we wanted to do research about it instantly. It's that instant gratification. You'd be able to pull up your iPad or your smartphone and automatically do research on it and incorporate it into the discussions that you were currently having. So that's one way it's working well. Study skills, organization, and goal setting. Actually, I think I did. Oh, skip this. The study skills, organization, and goal setting. One of the things that a middle school teacher is doing, I found an article that he had written. He's taking pictures, the camera phone pictures of the whiteboard notes, and then emailing them to students who have learning disabilities. And that's something that's been working really well for them, because if you're not necessarily skilled in the art of note-taking, this gives you the exact information that was on the board in a very easy way. There's also an application called Simple Goals. And Simple Goals helps you identify what you want to do throughout the course of the year and make really targeted decisions on how to do that and be able to follow along with that in class. Mid-class polling. I thought this was such a neat idea. This is a way that you can determine collective understanding of the class. So say Dr. Wahby said to us, how many of you think that the answer is A, B, C, or D? In the middle of class, we could just push a button on our iPad or our smartphone, and he could look at the results instantaneously and see who is understanding this. It offers a unique participation method for students who maybe are shyer or don't have the verbal skills, don't necessarily participate as much. It's a really easy way for them to become involved in the class. And it's also a good way to identify early the struggles that certain students may be having. Finally, distribution of praise. We all know how important in this iGeneration praise is. And so what some teachers are using is TweetDeck. They're able to Twitter or Facebook shout outs to different students and to kind of distribute that praise in a really public way and in a vehicle that they're currently using. Emailing or texting parents pictures of high scores. So say I got a 20 out of 10 on my paper and I'm really excited about it. Dr. Wahby could take a picture of the 20 out of 10 and email it or text it directly to my parents, and it is something, they can show their work friends. They can say, oh, look how great Michelle's doing. It's just another way, and it's kind of that bragging culture of the distribution of praise. That's another way it's being utilized. And finally, blogs. Some teachers are specifically highlighting things on, be it on a Facebook page or an actual physical blog that they have, ways to kind of highlight their student success rates. Limitations with smartphone in the classroom. Obviously, cost is always a limitation. They are finding that smartphones and iPads are costing less than a full-size desktop or laptop. So in some ways it could also be a pro as well as a limitation. Signal reception is something that can be tough. We've all been in situations where we can't get a signal on our cell phone, and that can be a frustration. So that's a limitation. Disruption potential. With all of the positive factors that come along with it, you could always be texting, you could always be on Facebook, things like that. So disruption potential is still high. Liability issues. If kids are looking on things that they shouldn't be looking on during the class setting, what does that mean for the administration of the school, and to what extent are they liable? And finally, the unknown factors. Like I said, this technology is so new, we're not exactly sure how much of it is going to be, a pro, and how much of it is going to be a con as we go on. But if you can't beat them, join them. So I think for right now, we can look at all the positive things that are associated with this technology, and if we have the ability to use it, we should go ahead and utilize that.
Okay, my part of the paper focused on solutions, and I found this study done at the University of Michigan, which I thought was really interesting. It talks about attention restoration theory, which says that there's two types of attention we all have. We have directed attention and we have involuntary attention. So your involuntary attention, like if you're out in nature and you see a sunrise, it's this fascinating stimuli that just takes your attention away and you just focus on it. Whereas directed attention is actually a concentrated thought. You're focusing on doing your homework, or if you're in a city, you're constantly checking to make sure what direction the cars are coming from when you cross the road so you don't get hit. So what they wanted to determine is if nature affected your attention. And they did a study where they did a test, and then they sent students either on a walk through the park or a walk through Ann Arbor, downtown Ann Arbor. And the students that had gone on the walk in the arboretum actually scored better on the test when they came back. They were able to concentrate better, whereas the students who had gone out into downtown were actually more distracted. So what they determined was that when you're allowed to let your involuntary attention take over by just interacting with nature, your directed attention actually relaxes, and you're able to better focus after you come back. So it actually increases your critical thinking, it increases your concentration, and it increases your attention. And they determined that you don't even have to go out and walk through nature. You can actually just show pictures. They showed them a PowerPoint was the second set of data they collected, and those students that just looked at pictures of nature versus pictures of downtown also scored better. Another thing to do, if you're trying to get information across to people, you can create a list. A lot of people think a short list of 10 would be 10 words, but really a list can be made up of short paragraphs that are 80 words or less. These are perfect because they're direct and to the point, and they don't require a lot of attention for people to read, but you can still get your information across. And then real briefly, we talked throughout the class this semester about email, and there's various things you can do to eliminate the distractions of email. You know, you can just check it periodically, turn it off, or you can choose not to use email and just talk to people face to face or by the phone. Or there's a new software being developed by Microsoft. It's called Attentional User Interfaces, and this actually is based on the Bayesian probability and user behavior. So basically the software follows what you're doing during the day, kind of checks your keystrokes and how long you spend with certain windows open and all that. And then based on probability, it determines the advantages or disadvantages of interrupting you, say when an urgent email comes through. It may decide this person's busy working on something based on past behavior, I'm going to wait and interrupt them maybe 30 minutes from now. This software is not out for public use yet. It's still being developed by Microsoft, still in the early stages, but it's maybe something down the road that people will be able to use at work. And then if you're an instructor, and you have a lecture, or if you're running a meeting, there's a few things you can do. We talked about Michelle talked about how there's devices in meetings and devices in the classroom that people are being distracted by. You can establish explicit rules that say, look, if you bring your laptop in, you can only use it to take notes or use it for whatever applications we will be using during this time. Or you can restrict access to network applications, but that can be detrimental because maybe people can't get to the applications that they will need for the meeting. You can keep your sessions interactive. If you have them interactive, people don't have time to be distracted and use their laptops to surf. So to do this, you need to use variety. Discussion, question and answers, activities, and then take time to review, take breaks, maybe show pictures of nature so people get a little restoration. And then, of course, be well prepared and organized. That helps keep people's attention. If you're not well organized and prepared, then they'll get easily distracted. So, our conclusions. Anybody want to go first? Me? You can go. All right. My conclusion is you just need to adopt a balanced two-prong approach. One, you need to take the technology that's there and integrate it into the classroom or the meetings or whatever, because people are using it. It's already there. So integrate it in positive ways. And then two, you need to make an effort to take a break from technology ourselves. You know, you need to get outside and just walk around nature a little bit, take in the local park, because your brain needs the time to relax. It needs a break from technology. So I think you just need to develop a balanced plan. Don't give up your technology because you don't want to be without it. But you also need to kind of, take breaks now and then, enjoy yourself.
I think that I conclude that I should be studying for all my finals in the middle of like a state park or something. I thought that was a really interesting discovery that about nature, and it makes sense. It does, just to kind of remove yourself from the distractions. Another thing that I think is really important is just with the utilization of the smartphones. Again, like Lee said, finding that balance. I manage a call center for 35 undergrad Eastern students right now, and we have a cell phone box that we have at the front door that you have to put it in because you're already on one phone, you don't need to be on two. And understanding, doing all this research and understanding the importance of multitasking and everything, you still have to draw the line and you still have to have your limits.
I agree. I believe there has to be balance. I think that in our world, we're so used to the chaos and the constant do this, do that. There's never enough hours, it seems, sometimes in the day to do everything that needs to be done. But one of the things that came up that I thought about was, where's the line drawn for educators and trainers? How much responsibility should they take on to make sure that people receive the instruction that they're trying to give to others? And I think that more people need to be responsible for preparing themselves mentally to be alert whenever they come to a training event or a class, especially with the information about going outdoors. You just need to take that time back and prepare yourself.
As a teacher of high school students, I think it's important that you kind of realize, like, people's brains are changing. I mean, kids don't learn the same way they did 20 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. So I think, like, a lot of people think that a lower attention span means a lack of intelligence, but that's not it at all. Just because they can't sit still for 40 minutes straight and absorb everything you're saying doesn't mean that they aren't brilliant people. I think people's minds are starting to be wired differently, and I think it's up to educators, trainers, to learn how to teach to your changing students. Basically, I think attention span's not the problem. I think people just don't know how to adapt to change as much. I mean, you see all these teachers who are a couple years from retirement, and they wonder why their kids act up. Well, yeah, you're still using the same worksheets you used 30 years ago. These aren't the same types of kids. So I think it's all about adapting. Oh, we're done. All right.
Would you please give questions? Attention span. Yes, 4 hands. Yes, start with here.
This is for the classroom. Did you see anywhere in your studies about the use of the professors using Twitter in their classroom? We talked about how students maybe are uncomfortable to ask questions. Now, like major sporting events, you can tweet a message usually, and it scrolls across the big screen, and people are like, "Hey, that's me." Like, did you see anywhere where their teachers are using that to actually keep like an index of questions, or it comes up on the underneath the bottom of the PowerPoint and he catches it?
Yeah, in my findings, I didn't find anything specific, but I can speak from personal experience on being on webinars where there are up to 2,000 people that are on this webinar, and it's literally not feasible to have a speakerphone conversation with 2,000 people across the country. So one of the tactics that they employ is to use the virtual chat feature, and then have a moderator kind of filter through the virtual chat. So they say, where's everybody calling in from today? And everybody types in where they're calling in from. They say, okay, I see Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, and are able to kind of do it that way. So where that's not maybe exactly the same just in terms of Twitter, it's another avenue that's being utilized that I know of in a training function.
Okay, so as far as video games, they're saying like kids are spending all this time on video games. However, they didn't mention anything about how like children now they're doing some of these games like Call of Duty and all that stuff, and these kids who are playing these games are actually designing military tactics and strategies nowadays. There's kids who are playing these flight simulator games, and then they're hopping into the cockpit of a jet and can actually fly these jets based solely on this experience within the games. So, I guess the question is, how was that actually a bad thing? I mean, because in one aspect you may say, well, it's pulling away from their attention, but on the other hand, it's turning them into geniuses in certain categories.
I didn't do research into that area because I was looking at attention span specifically, and so based off of what I saw, attention spans were just shorter, just like television. You get into that graphics and changes in scenery, so it makes for children everyday normal life seem bland and boring. And that was essentially the problem that they were talking about. Not necessarily using video games as educational tools, because I think that we should use technology to educate, but at the same time be aware of the effects.
I had read an article that indicated that some children playing video games, it actually, they're playing educational video games, but they're determining some studies that children that are better at video games have better skills as surgeons, or they're better pilots or whatever. They're actually developing skills while playing these video games that actually can make them better at whatever their occupation is down the road. So they're not saying all video games are bad. I mean, obviously there are some benefits, but then there's lots of disadvantages too. So.
Yeah, don't we think that children are getting spoiled by these smartphones because they might, I mean, previously back in around 10 years back, we don't even used to have a computer. We used to refer textbooks, go to the library and used to read and study, gain knowledge. Now these days what's happening is, they have smartphones. They are just, Googling it and just taking out the things in it.
I think that's a great point. I think that's something that we need to be aware of. But kind of like Emily was saying, just because we're learning in a different way doesn't necessarily mean that it's better or worse. I think that using this technology is allowing us to harness the energy and the resources that we do have and use it for positive instead of working against it. So it's easy for us who didn't have computers. I mean, I remember when the internet was invented. I mean, and I do look at the younger generation and say, man, you are getting kind of spoiled. But at the same time, I can see that they are being allowed opportunities that I wasn't able to have. So I think our best bet is to move forward in a positive direction by saying, while yes, this is the way it used to be, this is the wave of the future, and how can we best work with the tools that we have?
Other questions? Question for you. Can somebody be really, really absent-minded? Or when somebody is absent from here, he is or she is present somewhere else. So the mind is present somewhere, but not here. So my first question is, what your comment on being absent-minded? If a teacher has 15 kids and one of them is not here, he is somewhere else, what would you do?
Squirt them with a bottle of water.
Say it again.
Squirt them with a water bottle. Wake them up. No, I don't do that. But I think, some of the research I found was about how a wandering mind isn't necessarily a bad thing. So everybody finds themselves, they did a study where they ask a group of students to read the first chapter of War and Peace. And every time that they realized their mind was wandering, they had to tap a key on a keyboard. And I mean, it happened like 40 times on average for one chapter. And so, I mean, this is common. I mean, it's not a bad thing to have one's mind wander. Kind of like it's not a bad thing to play video games. What is important is choosing your priorities. I mean, if your mind's wandering and you can't snap it back to what's important, I think there's a problem beyond attention span and maybe just motivation.
Very good. Any other questions? So please give them another round of applause.